I never imagined that the night I stepped into my son's house would be the night I questioned everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and blood. People say blood is thicker than water, but I'll tell you this. Sometimes, blood can smell like rusted iron, and it can turn your stomach faster than betrayal itself. Michael had given me a spare key years ago, back when he still cared what I thought of him. But lately he'd grown distant, secretive, and dismissive ever since his wedding, when he stood on that stage and called me broke in front of hundreds of guests. He didn't know the truth about me, about the fortune I kept hidden. I had chosen silence over pride that day. But tonight, silence was no longer an option. It was a little after midnight when I pulled into his driveway. His lights were on, though he and Jessica should have been asleep. I don't know what compelled me to enter without warning. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet. No TV, no music, no chatter from upstairs. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, steady and unnatural in its dominance. Then I smelled it. That sharp, metallic sting. Iron. It clung to the back of my throat like the taste of a penny. I froze in the doorway of the kitchen, scanning the countertops. Everything looked normal at first. Clean counters, a couple of unwashed glasses by the sink. But then my eyes landed on the pantry door. It was slightly ajar, and beneath it, a faint red line stretched across the tiles like a scar. My heart lurched. I moved closer, my steps careful, my breath shallow. The line wasn't thick, but it was enough to confirm what I feared. It wasn't ketchup. It wasn't wine. I'd seen this before, long ago in a hospital ward. It was blood. I pushed open the pantry door. Inside, half-B, uried under a stack of towels, was a bundle. The fabric was damp, the crimson already darkening to brown. I bent down, my hands trembling, and peeled back the top towel. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an animal, as my mind desperately hoped. It was pieces of something unrecognizable, raw and bloody, wrapped and stuffed like garbage. My throat tightened, bile burning in my chest. "What the hell?" I whispered. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, but the kitchen was empty. Shadows stretched long against the walls, silent witnesses. My pulse thundered in my ears. I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen this. With shaking fingers, I fumbled for my phone. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, too calm for the panic in my chest. My son's kitchen, I stammered. There's blood. God. I don't know what it is, but it's not right. You need to send someone. Please. As I gave the address, my voice cracked. My gaze stayed locked on that bundle, afraid it would move, afraid it would vanish. When I finally ended the call, I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles went white. My son was upstairs, maybe asleep, or maybe pretending. And then, a sound. The softest shift of fabric. I looked back. The towels were gone. The pantry floor was bare. The blood that had stained the tiles just minutes ago had disappeared, as if it had been wiped clean in the blink of an eye. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text, unknown number, one line. You should have stayed quiet. Red and blue lights flashed across the front windows like restless ghosts, scattering shadows through Michael's living room. The sound of police radios crackled against the silence that pressed down on me. My phone was still slick with sweat in my palm when 2 officers stepped inside. I felt relief for a fleeting second, until I turned toward the pantry. It was empty, clean, sterile, as though nothing had ever been there. No towels, no bundle, no blood. My breath caught in my throat. Just minutes ago I had stood right there, staring at something I can never unsee. And now, nothing. The older officer, Sergeant Harris, studied me carefully. His partner moved past, sweeping a flashlight across the kitchen tiles. "You the caller?" Harris asked. His voice was steady, neutral, but I could hear the quiet suspicion threading through it. "Yes," I managed, my throat dry. "I swear there was blood. Right here. A bundle of something. Someone removed it. I didn't imagine it." His flashlight beam danced across the pantry floor, spotless. Not even a drop. "There's nothing here, sir," the younger officer muttered. "Not even residue." I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. Had it been cleaned up while I waited? But how? I hadn't heard a thing. Before I could answer, a voice drifted down the staircase. "What's going on?" Michael appeared, barefoot in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair tousled like he'd just rolled out of bed. He rubbed his eyes, playing the role of the sleepy, confused son. "Dad?" His brows knitted together. "Why are the police here?" I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. Harris spoke first. "Sir, your father reported seeing blood in your kitchen. We need to ask if there's been any disturbance tonight." Michael blinked at me, then let out a low chuckle. "Blood? In the kitchen?" "No, officer, that's insane. We've been asleep all night, right, Jess?" Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs, her robe cinched tightly, eyes darting between us. She didn't say a word, just nodded quickly, like she was too afraid to contradict him. My chest tightened. She knew something. I could see it in the way she gripped the railing, her knuckles pale. Michael came down a few steps, frowning. "Dad, are you okay? You're not seeing things again, are you?" That word, again. He said it loudly, carefully, planting it in the officers' minds like a seed. Harris glanced at me, then back at Michael. "Sir, is there anyone else who could have been in the house tonight? Any reason your father might have misunderstood what he saw?" Michael gave a polite, strained smile. "Look, I love my dad, but sometimes he gets carried away. He's been under a lot of stress lately. Haven't you, Dad?" The way he said it, calm, patronizing, as if I were the unstable one, made my blood boil. I wanted to grab him by the collar and scream that he was lying, but the bundle was gone. The blood was gone. All I had were my words, and they sounded weak against his performance. The officers left soon after, muttering something about filing a report but finding no evidence. Michael watched from the doorway as the patrol car pulled away. The moment the taillights vanished, his expression changed. His polite smile melted into something cold, razor sharp. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so Jessica couldn't hear. "You shouldn't have called them," he whispered. A shiver crawled up my spine. "Why?" I asked. Michael smirked, his eyes glinting with something that wasn't sleepiness. "Because now they'll never believe you when it really matters." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message from the same unknown number. This one read, "You only saw a fraction. Next time, it'll be worse." I looked up at Michael. He was already walking, back up the stairs, whistling softly, like nothing had happened. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting my son. I was already losing ground. I sat in my car long after leaving Michael's house, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. His words still echoed in my mind. "They'll never believe you when it really matters." He was right. The police had looked at me with polite doubt. Jessica had kept quiet, and Michael had played the role of the concerned son flawlessly. He'd always been good at that. The role. Michael was the kind of man the world applauded without ever seeing the shadows underneath. I thought back to the last time he'd humiliated me in public. His wedding. The memory still burns. The ballroom had glittered that night. Crystal chandeliers, golden centerpieces, champagne flowing like rivers. Jessica looked radiant in her ivory gown, her smile wide but nervous. And Michael. He looked like the perfect son any father would be proud of. Sharp tuxedo, easy charisma, shaking hands and thanking guests as if he'd built the empire himself. But beneath that polished exterior was arrogance, entitlement. When he took the microphone for his speech, I had expected a few words of gratitude, maybe a nod to his mother who had passed, and perhaps, just perhaps, a word for me. Instead, his voice rang out with a joke. "And of course, we couldn't have done this without my dad," Michael said, smiling wide. "Even if he couldn't contribute much. But hey, love is more important than money, right? Even when you don't have either." The laughter was sharp, cruel, rolling through the room like broken glass. I forced a smile, but inside I was bleeding. They thought I was broke. They thought I was irrelevant. What Michael didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a fortune. Investments, real estate, quiet deals built slowly over years of silence and sacrifice. I had chosen not to flaunt it, not to hand it over to a son who measured a man's worth only by the size of his bank account. So I swallowed the humiliation. I let him think he had buried me with that speech. But humiliation has a long memory. And now, with the kitchen incident, with the bundle that disappeared, and with the text that haunted me, I began to wonder if Michael's cruelty was more than words. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe he had always wanted more than respect. Maybe he wanted everything, including my name, my fortune, my life. That thought clung to me as I remembered Jessica's face at the top of the stairs earlier, pale and silent, eyes full of something she dared not speak. That night, I drove past their house again, unable to sleep. The lights were off this time, the quiet almost too perfect. I parked down the street, telling myself I would leave in a minute. But then I saw movement in the backyard. Jessica. She was sitting on the edge of the patio, her robe wrapped tight, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook as though she were crying, her body fragile against the night. For a moment I thought about driving away, pretending I hadn't seen her. But something inside me said no. Because if Jessica was crying, then the perfect son wasn't perfect at all. I opened my car door quietly and stepped into the darkness, each step slow, deliberate. The night air smelled of grass and faint smoke from distant chimneys. When she lifted her head, our eyes met across the yard. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. And that's when I knew. Jessica had secrets too. Secrets about Michael. Secrets I wasn't supposed to know. "Jessica?" My voice was low, cautious, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile silence around her. She flinched at first, pulling her robe tighter. For a moment I thought she might run back inside, but then her shoulders dropped. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that isn't just physical but soul-deep. "Mr. Miller," she whispered, her eyes red-rimmed, "you shouldn't be here." I stepped closer, though not too close. The air between us was heavy, thick with unspoken things. "I saw you," I said gently. "Crying. And after what happened earlier, I think we both know something isn't right in that house." Her gaze darted back toward the kitchen window, as though Michael might appear there at any moment, watching. "You don't understand," she murmured. "Then help me understand," I pressed, keeping my voice steady. "I know what I saw, and I know Michael wants me to doubt myself. But you were there. You saw how he turned the police against me." She shook her head slowly, tears glistening in the corner of her eyes. "You don't know what he's capable of. You think you do, but you don't." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I wanted to ask 100 questions at once, but I held my tongue, letting her gather her courage. Finally, she looked up at me, really looked. And for the first time, I saw something I hadn't before. Fear. Not of me, of him. "Michael's in trouble," she said at last. "Big trouble. He owes people money. Not the kind of people you can ignore. Dangerous people." I felt a chill crawl over my skin. "What kind of people?" Her lips trembled. "The kind that don't ask twice." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "So what does that have to do with me? With what I saw in the kitchen?" Jessica hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder again. When she leaned closer, her voice dropped to a whisper so thin I almost didn't catch it. "He's been using your name." I froze. "What?" "He forged documents," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other now, desperate to spill before fear silenced her again. "Bank transfers, loans. He said he needed time, that he'd pay it all back before anyone noticed. But they're already noticing. He's drowning, Mr. Miller, and if they find those papers, it'll look like you're the one responsible." "Is he on?" My breath caught in my throat. A lifetime of caution, of building everything quietly and carefully, and with a few strokes of a pen, Michael had dragged my name into the dirt. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice breaking between anger and disbelief. "Because—" Jessica's voice cracked. She pressed her hands against her face, then lowered them slowly, her eyes burning with despair. "Because I don't want to end up like—" She stopped herself, biting her lip. "Like what?" I pushed, my heart hammering. She looked away, her body trembling, then whispered, "Like the others." The word hung in the night air, sharp and chilling. Before I could demand more, she reached into her robe pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and pressed it into my hand. "Look for yourself," she said, "but don't let him see you with it. He'll know it came from me." I unfolded it under the weak glow of the patio light. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a page from a ledger. And there, in black ink, was my name scrawled beneath numbers I'd never written, transactions tied to debts I'd never made. I stared at the forged signature, bile rising in my throat. Michael was building a noose, and the rope had my name woven through it. When I looked up, Jessica was already backing toward the house, her face pale, her lips trembling. "I've said too much," she whispered. "He'll know. He always knows." The sliding door closed behind her, leaving me alone in the backyard, clutching proof that my son was not just arrogant or cruel, he was dangerous. But it wasn't just the forged signature that haunted me. It was her unfinished sentence. Like the others. Who were the others? And what had Michael done to them? The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of an entire life pressed between its folds. I slipped back into my study, careful not to wake anyone, and shut the door with a soft click. The desk lamp cast a sickly yellow glow as I smoothed the ledger page across the surface. My eyes traced the figures, neat columns of numbers stacked with an accountant's precision. But then came the signature. My signature. It was wrong. Not sloppy, not careless. Too perfect. My handwriting bent at just the right angle, the loops of my letters exactly as I'd make them. But there was no tremor of age, no hesitation of hand. It was a signature copied by someone who had studied me too closely, as though my son had practiced signing my name until he could forge me flawlessly. "Why, Michael?" I whispered into the quiet of the room. I turned the page over, my stomach sinking further. There were more. At least 6 transactions, each one bigger than the last. Loans, wire transfers, shell accounts, and they all tied back to me. A sudden knock startled me. Too sharp. Too late at night. Before I could hide the paper, the door opened. Michael leaned casually against the frame, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Working late, Dad?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost amused. I slid the paper halfway under a folder, my hand tense against it. Couldn't sleep. His eyes flicked to my desk, sharp and deliberate. "Strange. I thought you'd be tired. Long night." For a moment we stared at each other in silence. The house felt too still, as though it was listening. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked finally. He smirked. "Just checking in. Making sure you're comfortable." The way he said it twisted in my gut. Comfortable. Like I was a guest in my own house. Or worse, a prisoner. When he left, closing the door without another bored, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled as I pulled the ledger page back into the light. That's when I saw it. A name scribbled faintly in the margin beside one of the larger transfers. Not my son's handwriting. Different. Rushed. Almost panicked. It read, A. Collins. I frowned, heart racing. Whoever Collins was, Michael wasn't working alone. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of realization crashing down on me. My son hadn't just forged my name for debts. He was weaving an entire web, and he wasn't the only spider at work. And if Jessica was right, if others had already ended up like, then Collins might not be the only name buried in that web. I folded the page again and slid it into my jacket pocket, a decision crystallizing in my mind. If I didn't move fast, the lies on that ledger wouldn't just ruin me, they would bury me. By morning, the ledger burned a hole in my pocket like a secret too dangerous to keep. Every step in the house felt like stepping through a minefield. Michael's smirk in the doorway last night hadn't left my mind, nor had the faint scrawl of A. Collins. I kept quiet at breakfast, pretending to sip coffee while my son breezed in late, showered, smiling, and far too at ease. He asked about the weather, the garden, even complimented Jessica's cooking as if the night before had never happened. But his eyes were calculating. That evening, Michael announced, "Family dinner. All of us. No excuses." The words weren't a suggestion. They were an order. The dining room was set like something out of a magazine. Polished silverware, crystal glasses that caught the chandelier's glow. Jessica's strained smile as she carried in the roast. She looked everywhere but at me. Michael sat at the head of the table, his chair angled just slightly, king surveying his court. "To family," he said, lifting his glass. Jessica hesitated before raising hers. I followed, though the bile in my stomach threatened to rise. "To family," I echoed. Dinner began with small talk. Michael asked about my day in that casual, knife-edged way of his. He laughed too easily, complimented Jessica too loudly, filled the silence with words that felt rehearsed. But then, halfway through the meal, I noticed it. Michael reached for the wine bottle, pouring into my glass before I could stop him. The liquid shimmered dark red under the light. He poured his own next, but his glass remained only half full. Our eyes met over the rim. His smirk was small, almost invisible, but it was there. Jessica froze. Her fork clattered against her plate, her eyes darting between us. She whispered, "Michael." But he silenced her with a glance. "Drink, Dad," he said smoothly. "You deserve it." The room spun with memory. The L. Edger, Jessica's trembling confession, the whispered warning of others. My throat tightened. I lifted the glass slowly, watching his face. Then I set it down without tasting a drop. "Not tonight," I said. His smirk faltered just for a second, before returning sharper. colder. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his own wine lazily. Jessica excused herself, rushing to the kitchen. The silence stretched like a rope pulled taut. Michael tapped his glass against the table. Clink, clink, clink. Each sound louder, each one a threat unspoken. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he murmured, his tone light, but his eyes like ice. When dinner ended, I pushed back my chair, my heart thudding. I knew, beyond doubt now, that this wasn't just about forged signatures or debts. My son wanted me gone, and tonight's wine glass had been a test, or a warning. The morning after the dinner felt heavier than the wine glass I refused to drink. I barely slept. The words of the night guard echoed in my skull. "I saw him pour something in your drink." It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was fact. My son had tried to poison me. I needed to tell Jessica. I needed her to finally look me in the eyes and admit everything. But when I went to her room, her bed was empty, her suitcase gone. At first I thought she had gone into town, maybe to the florist or the seamstress for her final fittings. The wedding was only a day away. The house should have been alive with chatter, planning, and nerves. But the halls were eerily silent. I found Michael in the study, lounging as if nothing in the world was wrong. His tie was half done, and a tumbler of whiskey rested casually in his hand. "Where's Jessica?" I demanded. He raised an eyebrow as if I had asked about the weather. "She's around. Brides get cold feet, you know." "She wouldn't vanish the day before her wedding," I shot back. His smirk deepened, that same razor's-edge grin he wore at the dinner table. "Maybe she realized she's marrying into more than she bargained for." The way he said it, casual, almost bored, chilled me. I searched the house, every room, every hallway, even the garden where she often sat with her sketchbook. Nothing. No Jessica. But in her vanity drawer, tucked beneath perfume bottles and scattered jewelry, I found a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. It wasn't a love note. It wasn't even written for me. It was a single line scrawled in her hurried, nervous handwriting. "Ask him about the Collins debt before it's too late." The name again. Collins. Always Collins. I pressed the note into my pocket, heart racing. Jessica hadn't simply run away. She'd left me a trail. A desperate cry for me to dig deeper. When I stormed back toward the study to confront Michael, I found the door wide open, and the chair where he had been lounging was empty, the whiskey glass still sweating on the desk. He was gone. I stared at Jessica's note again, the words searing into my mind. Ask him about the Collins debt before it's too late. Too late for what? For her? For me? For the entire family? The house was quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of silence that comes just before a storm. I moved quickly, my pulse racing, until I stood before Michael's locked office door. For years he had called it his workspace, the one place in the house no one entered without permission. But I wasn't asking permission anymore. I forced the lock with a fire iron from the hall stand. The door groaned open, revealing a room that smelled of expensive cologne, paper, and something colder: secrecy. The desk was littered with documents, scattered ledgers, and a sleek laptop still glowing faintly. On the wall, framed family portraits stared down at me. Michael as a boy, smiling, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. Jessica in her teens, awkward and shy. My late wife, Evelyn, holding us all together in her arms. I felt them judging me as I rifled through the desk drawers, searching for answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. That's when I saw it. A folder marked Collins. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, contracts, promissory notes, transfers of funds. But it wasn't the numbers that froze my blood. It was the names. Andrew Collins. Next to it, a birth certificate. I sank into the chair, my breath gone. The certificate listed Evelyn, my Evelyn, as the mother. Andrew Collins wasn't some faceless creditor. He was her son, my wife's son, my son's half-brother. The realization cut deeper than any blade. Evelyn had kept this secret from me for decades. Michael had known. He hadn't just been bleeding my accounts dry. He'd been funneling money to his hidden brother, a debt not of finance, but of blood. The office door creaked, and I nearly dropped the papers. Michael leaned against the frame, arms crossed, that cruel smirk plastered on his face. "Finally figured it out, Dad?" he said softly. "The family you thought you had was never the family you really did." I wanted to scream, to strike him, but the words tangled in my throat. All I could manage was a whisper. "Where is Jessica?" Michael's smile darkened. "Safe, for now. But you see, she knows too much. And you?" His eyes flicked to the folder in my hand. "You're already dead. You just haven't realized it yet." Michael left me standing in the ruins of my own certainty, the Collins folder shaking in my hands. His footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and deliberate, like he wanted me to follow. I didn't. Not yet. I sat in that office until the weight of betrayal crushed me against the desk. My wife had lied. My son had schemed. My fortune was a pawn in a bloodline game I didn't even know existed. But then, the smell hit me. It wasn't the stale cologne or the ink of old paper. It was sharper, acrid. Smoke. I shot up, heart pounding. A faint haze was curling under the office door. My instincts screamed. I dropped the papers, shoved open the door, and staggered into the hallway. The air was already thickening, heat rising fast. From the far end of the corridor, Michael's voice floated through the smoke. "Funny, isn't it? That ledger of lies. It burns just as well as the truth." Flames licked up the wallpaper near the parlor, crackling hungrily. My chest tightened as I realized what he'd done. He hadn't just threatened me with poisoned wine or hidden debts. He was erasing everything, the house, the documents, the history, with fire. "Michael!" I shouted, coughing. "Jessica's still in here somewhere!" A dark laugh answered me. "She'll find her way out if she wants to. You, on the other hand, Dad." His shadow wavered in the smoke, standing still and calm while the flames crept closer. "You've overstayed your welcome." Panic surged, but anger cut through it. I wasn't going to die in this house, not on his terms, not while Jessica was still unaccounted for. I pulled my shirt over my mouth and pushed through the thickening haze, searching desperately. Family portraits blistered in the heat, Evelyn's painted smile warping into something grotesque as the fire consumed the wall. That's when I heard it. Faint, muffled, coming from behind the pantry door. A voice. Jessica's voice. "Dad! Help me!" The door was bolted from the outside. A prison, not a pantry. Michael had locked her in. I lunged for it, but the heat was rising, flames crawling toward the ceiling beams. Wood groaned overhead. My lungs screamed for air. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the latch. And then, a crash. Part of the ceiling collapsed between me and the door, a wall of fire cutting me off from my daughter-in-law. Her screams were swallowed by the roar of flames. The flames clawed at the walls like living beasts. Every snap and crack of wood a death sentence waiting to fall. My lungs burned, my throat raw, but I pressed forward, searching for a way around the collapsed ceiling. Jessica's voice was still faint, muffled by smoke and fear. "Please, Dad." Her plea carried me. Step by agonizing step, I circled the fire, forcing open a side door that led into the wine cellar passage. The narrow hall was dark, cooler, but the air itself felt poisoned by smoke. And in that suffocating half-light, I began to hallucinate. Or maybe it was the truth manifesting itself. The corridor stretched into something else. A courtroom, long and narrow, its walls lined with shadowy figures I couldn't recognize. They whispered, their voices accusing, chanting. My heart pounded as if I were on trial, and maybe I was. At the front of this dreamlike tribunal sat Michael, dressed in black, smirking as ever. Beside him was a blurred face I knew must have been Evelyn, and standing behind them, clutching her stomach, pale and trembling, was Jessica. "You hid the truth," Michael's voice echoed, though his lips barely moved. "You buried secrets even as you built this house, and now you're shocked the foundation rots?" "This isn't justice," I croaked, pressing forward, my hands shaking. "This is your trap." The shadows around me hissed. Trap, betrayal, debt, blood. Jessica looked at me, her voice fragile but piercing. "David, he's not just after money. He's after the legacy itself. Andrew isn't only Evelyn's son. He's—" Her words fractured, drowned in coughs. The shadows surged closer, smoke rolling through the dream like a tide. I stumbled forward, desperate to reach her, but Michael's laughter thundered, shaking the very walls. When I blinked, the courtroom dissolved, and I was back in the cellar, choking, crawling toward the pantry door. My hands fumbled against the scorching wood, my ears ringing with Jessica's unfinished confession. I forced the bolt loose, slamming my shoulder into the door until it cracked open. Jessica fell into my arms, limp, smoke-stained, but alive. Her eyes fluttered, her voice weak as embers. He already changed everything. The will." Before I could press her, she went slack, unconscious, her words cut off. And somewhere above us, through the roar of flames and collapsing beams, Michael's footsteps faded into the night. The courtroom's echo still lingered in Richard's ears long after the gavel had struck. His family name, once revered, was now whispered with pity and contempt. The revelations of secret accounts, betrayal, and lies had stripped away the facade of unity he had so carefully maintained. Yet beneath the rubble of broken trust, one absence weighed heavier than the rest: Jessica. He hadn't seen her since that night, the night of the fire. Richard often wondered if she had vanished forever, swallowed by the flames of both the house and the truth. But whispers began to reach him. A woman who matched Jessica's description had been seen in a small coastal town. She was living quietly, working in a bookstore, avoiding questions. At first, Richard dismissed it as rumor, until the letter arrived. The envelope was tucked under his office door, sealed with nothing but her familiar handwriting. "Meet me at the pier. Midnight." Richard's hands trembled as he held it. Was it really her? Or another trap laid by those who wanted his empire destroyed? The pier was cloaked in mist when he arrived. Lantern light shimmered faintly on the water, casting broken reflections across the dark waves. He stood there, shoulders heavy, waiting. For minutes that stretched into an eternity, there was only silence. Then, footsteps. Soft, deliberate. "Father." The word pierced through the fog like a blade. Jessica emerged slowly, her face pale but resolute. She was thinner than he remembered, her eyes hardened, her beauty sharpened by sorrow. Richard's throat tightened. "Jessica, you're alive." She didn't move closer. "Alive, yes, but changed. You should have told me everything." "I wanted to protect you," Richard said, his voice faltering. "From the ledger, from the lies, from your brother's schemes." Her expression hardened further. "Protect me? By hiding that I was never the daughter you claimed I was? By letting me walk into a marriage built on deceit?" Richard's breath caught. She knew. "The trial opened more than one box of shadows," Jessica continued, stepping nearer. "I know the truth now. About the adoption. About the inheritance you shifted. About why my blood never matched yours. Her voice cracked, but her eyes blazed. I was a pawn, Father. A piece in your game against your enemies. Tell me, did you ever love me? Or was I just another move on your chessboard? The silence between them was heavier than the fog itself. Richard's heart thundered. He reached out, but Jessica stepped back, her coat swaying with the wind. I came back, she said, her tone steeled. Not for reconciliation, but for answers. And if you won't give them to me, I will drag them out of you in front of the world. She turned, her figure vanishing into the mist. Richard stood frozen, his hand still outstretched. For the first time in his life, the master of control felt utterly powerless. But as Jessica's footsteps faded, he noticed something on the wooden post beside him. Another envelope, sealed with her handwriting. His name scrawled across it. With trembling fingers, he opened it. Inside was a single line. The ashes aren't yours to keep. Richard's face paled. She wasn't done. Jessica had returned not as a daughter seeking comfort, but as a storm ready to claim what was hers. And he knew with chilling certainty that the final reckoning had only just begun. The letter burned in Richard's palm as though the ink itself carried fire. The ashes aren't yours to keep. Jessica's words haunted him long into the night. By morning, his estate was swarming with vultures, lawyers, creditors, and estranged relatives who had once bowed to him. The empire he built on silence and secrets was collapsing. But Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Until the day of the reading. The family had gathered once more, this time in the study where Richard's father's will had first been read decades ago. The mahogany table gleamed under the dim chandelier. Documents lay stacked, waiting for signatures, waiting to decide who among them would inherit the ruins of the empire. Jessica entered quietly, her footsteps deliberate, her presence commanding. Gasps rippled through the room. Some whispered her name in disbelief, others in fear. Richard rose. Jessica, don't do this here. This is the only place to do it, she replied, her voice steady. She placed a small, worn box on the table. It was old, scorched at the edges, its brass lock blackened as if by fire. What is that? A cousin muttered. Jessica's gaze cut to Richard. The real ledger, the one you thought was lost in the flames. A chill swept the room. You hid money, Father. Moved assets into shadows, named heirs that were never supposed to exist. And worst of all, you built everything on lies about me. Her eyes glistened, but her voice held. I am not your blood. I am not your legacy, and I will not be your pawn. Richard's voice cracked with desperation. Jessica, listen to me. You are my daughter. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. I took you in because I loved you, because I needed someone who wasn't corrupted by this family's poison. Her hand trembled on the box. If that were true, you would have told me. You wouldn't have turned me into a secret to be wielded against your enemies. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Miss, if that ledger is what you claim, it changes everything. The entire inheritance will be ashes, Jessica interrupted. I don't want his empire. I want it gone. She opened the box. Inside were burned fragments of documents, but enough remained, names, numbers, transfers, that no one could deny the truth. Gasps filled the room again. Cousins and uncles began shouting, some furious, some terrified. Richard staggered back, his face pale. You can't destroy everything I built. Jessica's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. I already have. With a sudden motion, she struck a match. The flame flickered in the dim study, reflecting in her eyes. She dropped it into the box. Papers curled, blackened, and burned, the fire devouring the last threads of his empire. The room erupted, voices shouting, chairs scraping, but Jessica didn't flinch. She stood still, watching the flames consume the lies, watching Richard's legacy dissolve into smoke. When the fire was done, nothing remained but ashes. Jessica turned to the stunned room. Inheritance isn't money, it's truth. And the truth is, all we ever carried was poison. Without another word, she walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Richard sank into his chair, staring at the ashes. His empire, his secrets, his daughter, all gone. But in his heart, he knew the story wasn't over. Because ashes, in the right wind, always rise again.